Welcome, everybody. We're going to be working today on the last little bit of Unit 2, which is building this app called the Apple Pie app. We did a lot of stuff in the preceding week or so learning about the Swift UI kit. And this is kind of the fruition of like not only the concepts that we learned coding-wise, but also the interface stuff that we've learned too. So there's a lot of pieces here in this project, and it looks like a pretty simplistic project, but there's a lot of layers to it. So the one thing is building this interface, and basically we're going to build this app where it's a word guessing game, you know, where you have to guess the letters of the word and hopefully you find the right ones, and it makes the apples do things on the tree. So that's basically the general lay of the land. We are once again using the Develop in Swift Fundamentals book from Apple. This is based on Xcode 13. I think I'm using a newer version. You probably are too. That's fine. But this is the latest version of the book. There shouldn't really be too many differences between what we see on screen here in the book and what we end up actually experiencing in Xcode. The one thing that I will say is that most of the time I will pull this off to the other screen, and Xcode would be primarily on my screen. There are a lot of tedious tasks in this app build, as app building kind of can be that way. So just keep that in mind. And it's all about finding efficiencies. You know, when, like, for example, if you're putting all of these letters on the screen, and you can imagine these are going to be like buttons, basically, right? That people will be clicking on. Well, we got to create all those buttons, and all of them have to have outlets, and all of them will have actions. Right. So you can see that it's going to generate a lot of code. So like right off the bat, you can see this is be a lot more complicated than anything we've built. At the same time, it's a game. It's fun. You could easily like spin this up into something different. So, you know, if you have an idea to make it something better, go for it. Absolutely. All right. I'm going to pull this off to the other screen, and I'm kind of using it as my script as I go. So if you guys think I'm being brilliant, it's probably the script that's brilliant and not me. I have gone through this training, so I always say this when I do the videos a few times. I've done the second course. Well, that's not true. I did the first course twice, and the second course once, and the third course once. So I haven't done the second course twice yet, but I might do that for myself this summer again, just to kind of keep my own skills sharp, and maybe not. I'm not really sure. Anyhow. This is the book that we're using if you want to see what it looks like, but I'm going to move that out of the way too. And this is my course shell and Blackboard that we will also ignore. All right, well, let's bring up Xcode and get ready to code. So I have my splash screen here, and I'm going to start reading the instructions here. All right, so this is basically a word guessing game where we have to select the letters that build the words, and hopefully you know, it says each incorrect guess results in an apple falling off the tree. And then once all your apples go away, you're kind of done. The player wins by guessing the word correctly before all the apples are gone. So this is kind of like, you know, Wordle, if you will, right? Not too dissimilar. So if you guys play that game, here you go, right? Except we're using more than 5 letters. Kind of proud of myself because I'm on like a 20-day streak on Wordle. And I got it in 3 today, which is pretty amazing, I think. Okay, like you guys care. All right. The other aspect of this here in the instructions, it says, in this particular version of Apple Pie, whenever a round is won or lost, a new game is immediately started. And if there's no more words left to guess, all the buttons are disabled and the app needs to be restarted. So you could potentially come up with a really large dictionary of words, right? So that you could do this with. This is not Wordle though. So if you're thinking, you know, that you're building Wordle, you're not. It's just similar to Wordle. I have had this thought though, that, you know, maybe in some of the other classes where I teach GUI stuff, maybe even for like a web program, it would be kind of fun to generate a program like that. It's really not that hard to do once you get the logic of it, right? And you know how to use the tools. All right, so we're going to start by building the interface here, and I'm looking at the first instruction, which is to build a new project using the iOS app template, and we're going to call it Apple Pie. So we're going to create a new Xcode project, iOS app, pretty typical for us here. We're going to call this apple pie. We're going to stick with storyboard, Swift. I'm not worried about core data or tests. All right, click next. If you want to connect to a Git repository, you can do that. But I'm going to just put it in my folder here. And so I'm going to go ahead and do a create. All right, so now we have our blank app coming up on the screen. I do apologize for those watching the video. I'm kind of have a little bit of a cold. I think I'm over it, but yesterday was not a good day. Today I feel much better, but I still have a lingering cough and scratchy throughout. So I apologize in advance if I sound a little hoarse. We have our app info screen here. And I'm noticing in the graphic, they're asking us, and I'm going to pull the book over. So I'm zoomed in on the graphic. They want us to build this for iPad only, right? And I'm a little reluctant to take this step. I mean, I'll be real honest. I'm kind of thinking, okay, they have a reason for doing this, but I'm not sure that it's really functionally necessary. I think part of the reason is the scale of the application. So like if I exit out of this image, and you look at how they have it laid out, right? And they have it in what we call landscape format instead of portrait, which is the upright, app approach. My feeling is that we should just go with it as we normally do and allow it to rotate, and let's just try to make it fit. That's kind of my thinking. If we're struggling, I'm just putting it out there, then we will quickly revert back to iPad only. So I'm just telling you, I'm being brave, and I'm not doing what they say, right? And I'm trying to see if there's any other little stipulations. Say select the project file and the project name, deployment info, uncheck the checkbox under device for iPhone. Okay, they don't give a why. All right, so they don't give a why, and you know what? Whatever. But I am gonna try to follow all the parameters here. Now, if we're working in the widescreen mode, and one of the things that we talked about last week was like working with constraints and layouts and stuff. And as you kind of scroll forward through the book here, and maybe I already skipped over that screen, where we're doing this kind of stuff here, we're like lining things and layouts and whatever. If they provide hard-coded numbers, we're going to have to figure a way around those numbers, right? To alter the format. So I'm just putting it out there up front. This is not like a verbatim copy of this. All right. So
can I
go ahead.
Can I pause you right there?
Yeah.
I mean, can I share my screen because you are on an older version of Xcode, and that screen that you're seeing right now is a little bit different than
Yeah, you know what? Jonathan, that's a great idea. Let me stop the share. So I just want to let you know your face will be on in the video
That's
here
fine.
for just a moment.
That's fine.
Or if you want to be more strategic about it, just directly share your screen and then we'll skip that step.
I will share my screen. Let's see. Share screen. Let's do Xcode. There we go. Oh, no, this one.
All right. Now that is
Okay.
coming up on my other screen, but I believe it's still recording. So we'll find out in the aftermath, I guess. All right. So I am seeing that it's different. First of all, you're publishing to iOS 17, right?
And I don't have an option to change. Oh, there we go. So would maybe,
Yeah, you're looking for a different version of iOS so you can get like the other choices.
I'm not seeing an option for iPhone, iPad, or a desktop application.
Well, let's confer with the book really quickly, because when you
Sure.
look at their instruction screen, and are you still sharing or not?
I am, yeah. And it is showing in the book that option is under deployment info. And I do not have that under my deployment info as far as devices.
Yeah, I'm what I'm thinking is that since they did the book, and I don't know what, okay, so I'm making an assumption here. When we hit the book, and I'm going to go ahead and reshare my screen here.
Mhm.
When they printed this, Xcode was in version 13. And I think iOS was somewhere around the same version, like 13 or 14, maybe something like that. So I
Mhm.
think what we're seeing is a pretty old, okay, so here you go. Xcode 13 compatible. That's why.
There we go. Yeah.
So like I'm not sure exactly which version of Xcode I'm on. It's like 14 or 15, but it's also which iOS you're pushing to. That one's pushing to 15.0, and apparently that version allows you to pick your destination format. Like I said, I think we should just leave it alone and just roll with it.
Okay.
And if
Sure.
things don't fit, we'll adjust around it, right? Like, if they tell us
Yeah.
to set the buttons to be, 20 pixels wide, we need to make them 18, we'll make them 18, right? So whatever it takes to make it work.
Yeah.
Um, so hopefully that it becomes a little self-explanatory. All right. Well, I just want to ensure you can see my shared screen at this point.
Yep, I can see it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. All right, let's pull this back over. So we're trying to follow the guide here, and already,
Mhm.
we're breaking the rules because we're rebels or something. I'm not sure. Um, but it's kind of what you have to do a lot of times when you're working professionally too. So, all right. So the one thing that I will point out though is their screen layouts are all in landscape format. I'm a little reluctant to actually just right away switch to that. Let's see how it goes. And like I said, if it's horrible, we'll just backtrack and adjust. But we're just going to go with kind of the default mode. So I'm going to get rid of that info screen. I'm going to go to the main storyboard just to get that up on the screen. I'm going to make my coding environment a little bit bigger so we have a little more ample space for everything. Um, I do have the iPhone 14 Pro here as an output device. If you want to switch it, to an iPad, feel free, if that helps. I'm a little reluctant to do that, like I said. So I'm just going to stick with this and we'll see what happens. Yeah, now it now it does say the next instruction is open the main storyboard, right? And use the devices buttons to change the device to an iPad and change your orientation to landscape mode. All right, you know what? Maybe I will actually do that. All right, so where do we do that? So this is the run,
Ah,
right? And then this is the build down here. So if I make one choice up here, I want to make the same choice down here. I'm not really sure which one to pick. Do you guys do you have a preference as to which model? I own an iPad Air, so I'm like, tempted to go there. But maybe we just go regular iPad 10.
yeah, kind of right in the middle.
Yeah, I think that seems good. So that'll be the build destination, and then here, normally you see all your phone options, and then they have an iPad menu, and I'm going to try to choose the same device. So there it is. And then you'll notice that, okay, well, now it's too big for the screen. So you can zoom out here. Gosh, if I can only remember how to zoom out, right? Is it a control command? Nope. I guess I'm just fumbling with it. That's okay. You know what? And it's okay to admit that too, right? I mean, what coder
Yep.
doesn't fumble with their stuff from time to time?
I
I
know,
mean,
right?
that's like mostly what we're doing is fumbling with their stuff, and being brave enough to admit it is a good thing. But I did manage to get the whole thing on the screen.
If you go to the bottom of the screen there next to the 10th gen iPad, there you have the magnifying glass to your right.
Yeah, okay. You know what's happening is on my desk here. So this is like, full admission here. I have like a bunch of junk, including my teacup,
Oh, it's
which just
covering
helps
it
my
up.
sore throat. No, yeah, it's sitting right in front of that little control. But we can switch to landscape mode here. And so let's just do that.
Okay.
All right, but now we know how to zoom in and out. Isn't that wonderful? All right, and you know what? This will work just fine. All right, let's move on to the next instruction set here. It says, since you'll be using the auto layout to build the interface, it'll work in portrait mode as well, right? But they want us to start in this mode for whatever reason. It says, look back at the image of the finished app and using the interface builder tools that you've learned so far, how might you construct this interface? And that, that's actually a very pertinent question because we haven't really talked about a lot about this kind of stuff, but often when we're building an application, a GUI application is, you approach it a little bit different than building a console app. When you build a console app or we're doing a playground or whatever, you're just worried about the code. When you start building a GUI app, there's like different things. You do start thinking about what it's going to look like and how might I create this? Well, I think the first thing that I notice is, well, we have to have this graphic. And then there has to be either other graphics that hold the apples or many versions of the same tree with more or less apples, right? So like if you make the wrong guess, you lose an apple, right? And so you put up that's a 7 apple tree, and maybe you have one that's a 6 apple tree and a 5 apple tree, etc. In fact, in your project resources, if you do bring up Finder and you dig in, so we're going to be doing this pretty soon here, and you go into your student files for unit 2, you go to the guided project, and under resources, there are the series of PDFs here, which are the tree in all its various formats. So with everything from no apples to all the apples, right? All the apples being 7. You can see how they've numbered them. We are going to import these in just a moment, but that's the one thing to look at. The other thing is here we have all these letters, and it's kind of basically simulating a keyboard. So it's like a QWERTY keyboard setup. I don't know why we need to like do this, but really it's about the methodology of putting the controls on the screen, right? Because we could, in principle, just bring up the system keyboard, right? But if you're a Wordle player, you'll also recognize that Wordle has its own keyboard, right? It's like it's part of the app if you actually like examine it. And so how might we accomplish these? Oh, these might be buttons, without borders on them or whatever, but these might be buttons. You can see they try to align it like a keyboard, so they're not like in straight up and down columns. They're kind of, offset a little bit like the rows of a regular keyboard are. And then down here we have these blanks where I assume the word's going to appear, and then we have a little status area at the bottom. This is probably just a label, right? And maybe this is really 4 labels, I'm not even sure, but now you have kind of an idea of like what stuff we're going to put on the screen. Now for each one of these letters and each one of the letter spaces in the word, if you're kind of figuring out your app building stuff now, you realize we're going to create outlets and actions. Maybe not actions for everything, but at the very least, all of them are going to have outlets, right? So there's going to be, well, how many letters are there in the alphabet? Well, there's going to be a lot of repetitive work here. So just, fasten your safety belt and get ready for repetition here.
Right.
All right, so that's where we're at in terms of like how we're analyzing it. Now, they ask here, and so I just have the book up on the screen. This might be a little bit interesting. There's an image at the top followed by a grid of buttons and then 2 rows of labels containing text. Perhaps the simplest way to build it is by using a vertical stack view. This is a structure we talked about last time. And then, so it says, find the vertical stack view in the object library and drag it onto the canvas. So let's do that. So that's instruction number 1. Now, the other reason I like to put the book up on the screen like that is, these books are public domain. You can just go out there and find them. And if you have a Mac and you have Xcode, which is free, right? You can really, in principle, teach yourself how to do this on your own. If you have coding experience in particular, it's very achievable, right? Back in Xcode here, I'm going to go to I want to make sure that I'm clicked on the storyboard though. And then click on the object library. What we're discovering last week is if I was looking at a code page and I click the object library, it would give me code snippets instead of tools, or interface controls, right? So in other words, if I'm here and I click the object library, look at the difference in the stuff that comes up on the list,
Oh, well,
right?
that's really cool.
Yeah, well, you know what? It is really cool because there's a whole bunch of stuff here that is pre-built that you can just drop into your code, so you don't have to write code from scratch. I'm just putting it out there, right? But we're working in graphical view. We are going to pull in stack view. So I'm going to type in stack, and we were told to find the vertical stack view. Now I want you to notice horizontal goes across, vertical goes up, down, because we do have like 3 rows of buttons that are just letters, right? And those are going to go in a vertical stack view. The advantage of using a vertical stack view is that it helps us to get the layout to look nice without as much effort as it would if we were dealing with individual objects, because they're in a container together and they interact with each other. That was one of the big takeaways from last week. So it says that as you've learned in earlier lessons, you can figure out the position, width, and height of a stack by adding constraints between the stack and its super view. And it says, where does this stack start and where does it end? Well, it depends, real frankly. The image view is going to be near the top, so we don't want to put it there. And the last label goes along the bottom of the screen. So the grid of buttons begin near the left edge and ends near the right edge. Therefore, the stack view can be constrained to cover the entire screen. This is kind of interesting. So everything's going to go in this vertical stack view. So in other words, how do we control the tree and each row of letters and the labels? All of it goes in there. Kind of interesting. All right. So select the stack view and then use the add new constraint tool to add 4 constraints, and then set all 4 at the top of the popover to 0. Now the add constraints panel is down here, right? So you see this little tool that looks kind of like a crosshairs with a square in the middle or something. Click that tool. And then it says set all 4 fields at the top to 0. And just to kind of review this, like every time you change one of these, notice that the little red I-beam next to the field turns red to show that we're adding it, right? So we are constraining to the margins here. Oh, and I think I just blew it away. Darn it. Okay. Because I was trying to look at what the book is doing to make sure I have all the settings correct. But hey, no harm doing it more than once, so you can make sure you get it right. So there we go. We got 4 constraints. And then when we click the add button, what will happen is that stack view here will be listed in this panel, but the constraints become objects basically that we can mess with if we want. So if I wanted to remove one of these or all of them, I could do that, but each one can be individually viewed and manipulated there. That's the important part. But now the stack view fills the whole screen. All right, I think we covered that pretty well. So if you're following along in the student version of the book, I'm moving on to page 360 right now. And we're going to do a couple little tweaks here as well. So it says now you're ready to add views and controls to the stack, and it says search the object library for an image view. Let's do that. Let's come up here. I'm going to click on image view. I'm just going to type image. There it comes. And I'm going to just drop it here into the stack view. And it says, since there's only one item within the stack, it'll take up the entire space of the stack. But we want to go ahead and we want to change the content mode over here to aspect fit if it's not already there. And it says this will ensure that the width and height of the image is not distorted by the proportions of the image view. So in other words, the image we're throwing in is going to stay in the same proportions relative to itself that it started as, and it's not going to get stretched. And if you guys are like web people or GUI people, or an artist, I mean, you know what I'm talking about, right? You can enlarge an image proportionally, or you can do it unproportionally and have it look like hell, right? So aspect fit forces the aspect ratio of one dimension to the other to stay correct, and it fits in the space. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and add the apple tree images that are in the resource folder that we just looked at into our assets folder. So over here, let's go ahead and click on assets. I'm going to bring Finder up, and I already have that folder here, but if you're looking for it in the student file, so I unzip the student files, it's in folder number 2, Intro to UI Kit, and then Guided Project Apple Pie Resources. Here are the images as PDFs. All right, and I'm just going to drag these over and release, and then you get all of them here. And if you scroll through, you'll see it's like the apple, and then the number of the PDF corresponds to the number of the apples left on the tree. Pretty logical. It says after they've been added, select all of them and then choose single scale from the scales menu in the right. Now, right now, I do have them all highlighted because that's how they came in. But just in case you clicked off of it, you can just do that. Select all together, come over to scales, and then choose a single scale from this menu. All right. Now, you notice what that did. That just eliminated all the, the Zoom versions or the not, and I don't mean like screen sharing software here. I'm talking about the, like they have like a standard format, a large format, etc. There's just one size is what we're saying. It's just this one document. We are using PDFs, and PDFs are actually kind of an interesting format. Depending on how the image was created and put into the PDF, it actually turns into a vector graphic, so it should scale from a large screen to a small screen and still look pretty crisp. If you find that you have problems with that, of course, you should always use the scaling, and then you probably want to have multiple versions of every tree. It's a bit of work that you give to a graphic artist to do. Unless you're adept at that, go for it. Right. So moving on to page number 362. It does say here in the book, so I said this intuitively, but the book confirms these assets are vector art, which means they can dynamically scale to any size without losing quality. So if you guys ever wonder what's the difference between Photoshop and Illustrator, Photoshop creates bitmap images, which are tiny little squares, and when you zoom in on those to whatever degree, you'll see the little squares that create the image. A vector graphic is different. It doesn't work with little bitmaps. It's a set of mathematical instructions. So if I tell it to draw a line on an angle that's this color and this long and this thick, relative to a certain size, it can scale that to any size. And if you zoom in, it will be infinitely crisp because it's a set of instructions as opposed to the actual bits, right? Vectors typically take up less memory space, by the way. And it says here, in the instruction, it says, when possible, use PDF files with vector art so that you don't have to supply multiple scales for various devices. And so it's a strategy, right? So like if you have like 100 images you need to put on the screen, the last thing you want to do is take those 100 images and create like 3 or 4 versions of each one, right? Now, I don't know how this Swift software works with vector graphics. So like if I use an SVG file, would that work here? The only way to really find out is to try it. But what they're telling you is if you put an image into a PDF, the PDF handles the vectors. So that tells you a little bit of the secret sauce of a PDF, that a PDF really takes any bitmap that you drop into it and turns it into a vector graphic by its nature. That's why PDFs can universally print to any format and not lose, their stuff, basically. Okay, so now it says you can go back to the image view in the storyboard. Let's go back here and update the image property to use one of the tree images. And it says, even though you're updating the image views image in the code, this can help you visualize your interface from within the storyboard. So what we're going to do here is in the image view, we're just going to come up here and we're going to choose one of the assets. The author chose tree 0. I see no reason not to do the same thing. And once again, we're going to programmatically control which image is on here. But for right now, this is our guide, right? So we can see how the tree sits. It's too big, too small, too green, too brown, whatever. There it is.
How did you get that image in there? Sorry.
What I did is I clicked on the image view,
Okay.
right, and made it active. And then I was able to just simply select it from the
Oh,
drop
okay.
down over here.
Okay, there we go.
If you're not seeing that, you're not clicked on the image view.
Yeah, I got it up now.
All right. So now we're moving on to page 363 in the book. And I'm reading verbatim from the book, and it says the button grid is more complex. And my response to that is like, really? Yeah, absolutely. You're emulating the layout of a standard QWERTY keyboard, which has a unique number of keys in each row. And it says you can imagine each row as its own horizontal stack view, and you can contain these rows in a vertical stack view. So in other words, and GUI developers, right, and artists and web people, this is called encapsulation, right? It's taking one type of complex structure and just putting it into a different complex structure. So right now we have a vertical stack view that controls the whole screen. And now we're going to drop a horizontal stack view into one area of that screen. So it says use the object library to add a vertical stack view below the image view. Okay, so I think what they're going to have us do here, and I might be a little wrong, we're going to put in another vertical stack view, and then that vertical stack view is going to hold the horizontal stack view. So it's encapsulation on top of encapsulation. Seems really dumb, right? And when I first encountered this being a web person, I would always go, why the hell would you do that? Why would you put a div inside a div inside a div? You know, that kind of thing. And then you learn, because it gives you additional layers of control over the objects and the spacing in between them. And you have much more visual control when you do that, right?
Yeah,
So
it's WordPress in a nutshell.
yeah, it really is kind of a thing. So let's do that piece then. So now here's where it's going to get a little weird, because we're about to add another vertical stack view, and they want us, the instruction was, and add a vertical stack view below the image view. Right. Okay. So this is kind of weird, because like where do I put that? Right. Because we just filled the whole thing. Well, here's the one way you can do it, is you can actually do it here. Right. So you can come over to the sidebar where I can manipulate exactly where it sits. I'm going to put it right below the image here. And I'm still not seeing it because there's nothing in it. Right. So as we add additional stuff, the document outline here, this is why we have it, right? So when things aren't visible, we can access the stuff there. And it does say here, you can reorder the items within the stack by dragging them around in the document outline. And it's more apparent when you have more objects in there. Right now, we just have a tree picture, whatever. Next thing says each of the horizontal stack views or rows that you will add will be equal in size and centered. Select the newly added stack view, and then open the attributes inspector. That's this one. And change the alignment to center and distribution to fill equally. All right, so going to alignment, center, and fill equally. So alignment goes to center, distribution goes to fill equally. Also provide some spacing between the rows by setting the spacing to 5. And I want you to note right now, we don't see any of the effects of this. We're doing this kind of on faith, right? Even without actually seeing it. And you can see from the graphic in the book, that, yeah, yes, indeed, there's no like visual indicator yet. All right, moving on to page 364 in the book. Now add a horizontal stack view within the vertical stack. And it says you want the same spacing between columns as rows. So set the spacing to 5, alignment and distribution to fill. So let's get the vertical stack in there first. So we're going to go to the object library. We're going to start typing horizontal. It should just pop right up. And then in order to put this in there, I'm going to the document outline. And I want you to notice as I kind of move my mouse here, I don't know if you guys are catching this, but right now, if I dropped it in, it would be at the same level as stack view. And really what I want, and it takes a little bit of moving of your mouse. And the trick is, watch what I do here. My pointer now is below stack view, so it will go below. But if I go up into stack view, it will be subordinate to it. And that's what we're trying to achieve here. Okay. The so the alignment and distribution would be set to fill. And once again, we'll set the spacing to 5. So I'm judging from the nodding there that you're doing all right.
Yep.
All right, now it's not each row has a unique number of buttons, right? So if you look at the original graphic, or heck, you can just look at the keyboard on your computer, right? So the first row will have 10, the second will have 9, and the third will have 7. That's really kind of an odd arrangement if you think about it. Use the object library to add a button to the horizontal stack view. The letter keys on a keyboard are typically square. To achieve this appearance, select the button and use the constraints to add an aspect ratio constraint. And the constraint will be added, but with an unwanted ratio. Okay, so we'll kind of tweak these one at a time. Let's see if we can follow that instruction. So and this is where it gets kind of interesting, because it's like, wait, the alphabet has how many letters, right? Does anybody know the answer to that? Right. I had to remind myself by actually calling out the alphabet, but you can also add 10, 9, and 7 together, and it's 26, right? That's how many letters are in the alphabet. So we need to create 26 of these buttons. Okay. So before you go running to do that, don't create a bunch of them and then go in and change all the settings for each one. The smart way to do is you create one, get all the settings correct, and then duplicate it. Right. Right.
Yeah.
That's the smart strategy. So we're gonna do a button, and I'm just trying to read the instructions here again because I lost them already. Add a button to the horizontal stack view. The letters in the key or keyboard are typically square. All right, right. Okay. So we're gonna put it inside this view here, the one that's inside the other stack view. So there's our button. Now we can see it. Hey, that's awesome, right? To achieve the square appearance, select the button and use an add new constraint button to add an aspect ratio constraint. So once again, we're going back to this little button here, and we're going to click on aspect ratio and add the constraint, right? And it says you're adding the constraint, but it's not the ratio that you want, right? So then it says use the size inspector to edit the aspect ratio constraint. So the size inspector is the one that has this little like protractor button up here at the top, right? And what we want to do, and that's somewhere towards the bottom here, oh, right here, and setting the multiplier to 1. For whatever reason, I am not seeing that multiplier. So, this is welcome to my world here, right? So I'm going to click on the aspect. Oh, right here. Okay, so click on the edit for the aspect ratio, and we're just going to change this to 1. And I don't know if how that locks in. And I think we want to do 1 to 1. Okay, so notice I typed in the number 1 because I'm following the instructions verbatim. Apparently not a good thing to do, but let's do 1 to 1, right? And you notice if you look, right, it is square. How wonderful is that? All right. And it says use the attributes inspector to set the button's font to system. So let's go back to here. And the font, we're going to set the system. So in other words, whatever the default font is for the device is what's going to appear here. So if you have somebody that decided to use Comic Sans as their default font, they'll get that, right? I'm not sure why on earth you would do that. And set the font size to 30, and you can scroll through if you want, or you can type it in. Sometimes I get mouse lazy and just do it this way. And then I'm going to click done. I don't think they need us to set bold or anything like that. Just making sure. Okay. Now, the point of that is to make it more readable, but we did just the opposite. We made it very unreadable. But we will adjust that. Now, this is the very first button that we're creating, and the first one on the keyboard, top leftmost, is the letter Q. So they want us on page 366 now. I just scrolled over to make sure that that button is selected once again. And now we're going to change the it says we're going to change this to a letter Q. All right, okay, so I'm sorry, I'm like reading ahead on the instructions, and they're like, then you're going to copy paste it. I'm like, yep, that sounds great. All right, so right now the text says button. We're going to change this to the letter Q. The author is doing a capital letter. I don't see any reason why not to follow that. And then press the tab key to lock that in. Okay, much better, right? So that looks like that. Now, because I'm going to talk about this now, we're going to copy and paste this, but we're going to copy and paste it into our stack view. And there's a number of different ways to do this. One of the advantages of using both the horizontal and vertical stack views is when I paste other objects into it, and I've already predetermined my spacing, things are just going to drop beautifully in order on the screen. And then all we have to do is go in and change the letters. So it's going to be kind of slick that way. So I still have the button selected, and I'm just going to maybe even show you a couple different ways to do this. But here's it's selected. I'm doing Command C to copy, and then I'm going to paste, and it's not working. Okay, you might be encountering the same issue. So what you might want to consider doing is doing the copy up here, right? And I don't know if you guys could hear that in the recording, but when I try to copy it, it was going bloop, it's giving me the Mac sound, which is like you're an idiot sound, right? But now that I'm over here, I can select it. I wonder if I could come back here. Can I select here?
You could also do Command D for duplicate.
Well, Jonathan, you stole my thunder there, but yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's one of the other ways to do it. So I'm going to do Command C and then do Command V, 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 and I should have 10 of these, and I'm not even counting. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, and one more. And then, of course, we got to change the text. So look at your keyboard and follow the top row, basically. So this button here is going to become W. And then after I type in the letter, I am hitting the tab key. This one's going to become E. That one's going to become R. I am fumbling a little bit with my keyboard here. I'm not finding a good workflow on this yet. But hey,
There's no real graceful way to do this one.
There isn't, right? So there's some, there's actual work involved, and I think back to like the old Dilbert cartoons, and I'm like, that's crazy talk, right? If anybody like, okay, I'm dating myself and I apologize. So this one's going to be a Y. I think that was like the original, like IT geek cartoon,
Yeah.
Of course, non-geeks never really got it. The geeks did. So this is an I. And this is a O, N-O, right? Ugh, okay. It's not even evening and it's been a day already. So, and then this will be a P. All right. So we got the first row of our keyboard complete. Now, here's where it gets a little weird, right? Because we can just go into the next row of the stack view, right? Or add another horizontal stack view and do the same process again. Or, right? So here's the or, and I think you're already guessing what I'm going to do here. This is why another reason why we encapsulate things is now I can just take this stack view, copy that, right? And then paste that in. Or what was that keyboard shortcut, John?
Command D.
Yeah, Command D. So watch that trick. So this is Command D. It just duplicates it. All right, well, it did it. What's the problem with that approach?
It went outside
Yeah, it
of
went outside the
the stack
structure,
there.
but you could find a way to get it in here. So I think, yeah, there we go. So that's another way to do it. So I did duplicate it and then I dragged it into the right spot. If I Command Z that, so I'm going to Command Z that just for the sake of example.
Mhm.
And actually, I want to redo my stuff because I just redo. There we go. Okay, because I lost my P. Right. I could also highlight that, just do a Command copy and then a paste, and then it just puts it in the right spot. So really, maybe in this circumstance, that's actually the better approach. But the duplicate thing works really well too, right? All right. Now they don't want us to do it once. We need 3 rows of buttons, right? So we'll paste again, right? So I have all 3 rows. All right. So now we're going to go through and we're going to update each button with the appropriate letters. If there's letters left over, which there's going to be, just delete those. All right. So I'm just going to go in here and I'm just going to go 1 letter at a time. And then we got to do ASDF. So A, S, now, if you haven't figured this out yet, and I'm just gonna kind of put it out there. Another way to do this is you don't have to go up to the attribute inspector to do it. You can also click into the button and just type right on the button, right? If you're not aware, right? That works too. And in fact, this almost seems easier to me. And
Yeah.
maybe that's the byproduct of being somewhat lazy about it, but that's okay. You know, all the best coding ideas are generated from laziness, by the way. Oops.
That's definitely easier.
Yeah, isn't it? I mean, it is a little bit more efficient. So JKL. Hey, slide over a little bit. I think one of the tricks to it though is to make sure that you have everything in view, you know. And then of course this last button here I don't need, so I can just delete it. And you can delete it a number of different ways, by the way. And of course I'm doing it like this, and that's not really the best way to do it. So here goes the delete on that. I just use my keyboard to do it. So we got 2 rows of the keyboard done, and 1 left to go. So just keep that process going. And you can see I'm kind of monitoring stuff here in the sidebar as well. This is only going to have 7. So this is 10. I could preemptively just delete those 3, right? That works. And then just change the letters. So we have ZXCV. And you know, this is kind of a, you know, I always like to throw in a little computer history here and there. And you know, we're building a QWERTY keyboard, and I know a lot of you know the answer to this, but you know, I always tell people here in Wisconsin, you know, we always think of like the big smart brain trusts of IT all exist out in like California or something, or maybe over in like Switzerland or something weird like that. But the reality is there's so many inventions in IT that were kind of started here in Wisconsin, you know, like the web browser, for example, you know, like goofy stuff like that. Um, the QWERTY keyboard is another one of them, because the very first commercial typewriter company was in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And the reason they came up with this order for the letters is if the letters were ordered in order and people were typing, the hammers of the typewriter would get like tangled up often. And this was the layout that would create the least amount of hammer tangles, right? And that's why it was developed. Kind of silly, but whatever. The other thing that I always advise my students, and a lot of people just don't do this now, but when I went through school, I had several keyboarding classes, where you had a class that was just about typing, like how to put your fingers on, ASDF and JKL semicolon, and everything is a reach from there. And that's why the letter F and the letter J have little nodules on them so you can position yourself on the keyboard. Because I do watch a lot of young people now. It's not that they can't type fast, but they're hunting and pecking and their hands are all over the place. Where if you watch an old school typist that really knows that home row technique, oh my God, you can fly. And we did have a department secretary here at Gateway that worked in our IT department, and she was like one of those like 120 word a minute people. I'm more like a 40 or maybe 50 on a good day, with a lot of mistakes. And she could do 120 and not even look at her hands and get everything spot on. And for me, it's kind of a Zen thing, but that's totally an aside, but kind of interesting nonetheless. All right. So I'm looking now at the bottom of page 367. All right. So I think we completed everything up through page 367. We've been going for a while now. I think we should take a break. If you're cool with
Okay.
that. Let's do like a 5-10 minute break, and we'll come back and pick up where we left off.
Sure.
All right, so we took a little bit of a break and we are back, and I'm currently working on the top of page 368 in the student version of the book. And what we're going to do next is, so we've created our like virtual keyboard at this point, and the next step is to add a second vertical stack view, and 2 labels from the object library that's going to go below this grid of buttons. So now when you add this in, so I'm looking at the graphic here in the book, and I'm looking at how they're doing it. So I apologize for just kind of taking a moment here to look at it.
No, I'm looking at the book too.
Yeah, and like the words say one thing, but I'm seeing something different in the graphic.
Yeah, I see they have the labels underneath those 3 stack views and not in a
Yeah, you're
separate
catching
one.
you're catching the same thing that I'm catching.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering why they say one thing and they're doing another. Kind of a curious little thing. Says use the attributes inspector to change the font size of the first label with 30. Okay, so I'm just kind of reading here. It says below the grids within. Okay, so I'm now I'm reading it correctly. So this is all in the reading, right? Within the second vertical stack view.
Okay, there we
Okay,
go.
so
That makes more
it
sense.
would end up down here, right? So
Mhm.
it would be here. So what I'm going to do is, instead of dragging onto the screen again, I'm dragging over to this panel. So let's just go ahead and grab 2 labels. So I'm going to grab a label and I'm going to drag it and I'm going to put it so it ends up on the same level. Now it's not landing in exactly the right spot, but I'm going to slide it up and in here. And see, I don't want it within the constraints.
Do we need to collapse that stack view maybe? In the
Yeah,
middle?
that's a really intuitive thing. So let me Command Z what I just did. Let's collapse it. And then let's try to move it in. There we go. Okay, so that's not the right spot either. All right, let's put it here. Within the second vertical stack. Oh, I see. So like, I think maybe we do it like this. So see, now it's kind of in the right spot, at least indent wise. And then I think we can move it down. And I don't know, like the constraint. Yeah, the constraints really are not. And I don't know if there's like a shortcut key here for doing this.
I
So I apologize
I
for fumbling a
I
little.
collapsed all 3 of those horizontal stack views, and that was allowed me to kind of side click and drag that over a little bit easier.
Yeah, I still see it's not really aligning in the right spot. Like, that's not right.
I was able to get it with when it was collapsed, and it was just it's one of those things where it's just you got to get it just right.
Yeah, like right there. There you go.
Yeah, there it is.
All right. So now that
Yeah.
it's highlighted, I'm going to copy paste like so. Okay, so there we go. We finally got to it. All right. All right. Use the attributes inspector on each one of these. Um, change the font size of the first label to 30. We'll come over here and change this to 30. Yes, I'm doing the lazy mouse approach. And the second one goes to 20. So that's just a couple of clicks bigger. The buttons and labels will all have what is referred to as an intrinsic size, which the text within them determines. Okay. The auto layout uses their intrinsic size along with the stack view attributes to appropriately size the button grid, while the tree image view can shrink and expand as necessary. Okay, that's kind of interesting. Actually, they kind of point that out. So it says before you move on, verify you don't have any warnings or errors in the interface builder. You can build and run your app to ensure the layout looks correct on the different iPad simulators by using the view as feature in the interface builder. So let's just and that what they're talking about is this little piece here. But if you just do a run on it, it should load up in the iPad correctly. So let's just see if it loads up. And this is our first run here. So this is, typically we call this like a clean build, but we've done a lot of stuff to it. So there's no clean build here. We're just waiting for that simulator to launch. All right. And there's the iPad coming up. It's waiting for it to propagate. Waiting for something to happen. There we go. All right, so it did load up, and you notice we're in portrait view, and it actually doesn't look too bad. It actually lined up pretty nicely. So we got, I think, a pretty good momentum going here on this. The next step is, and we're now moving on to page 369, by the way. So the fact that we got it loaded up like this is a big win, right? So this is, a large part of the way there in terms of the interface. But now we need to do like all the coding stuff. So what you should do is stop the program from running. You can leave the simulator open. We'll be probably going back to it a few times. But now we have to do all the coding stuff and outlets and actions and all that. So I'm reading from the book here, and it says during gameplay, the text of the labels change whenever a letter is guessed correctly or whenever a new round begins. The image needs to change whenever an incorrect letter is guessed, and letter buttons need to be disabled whenever they're pressed and re-enabled before each round. So there's like a lot of mechanical little minor activities that happen here. To update these views, create outlets so that you can reference the views in the code. Open the assistant editor, and basically what that means here is, you can do this a number of different ways. Like you can just click and go to the code, but if you do and I'm trying to remember here if it's option click or command click. I think it's option click. Yep, it is. All right. So it's a lucky guess, was one or the other. This way we can have both the interface view where we can see the buttons and everything on the screen at the same time we're looking at the code. And I think this is really kind of a useful approach. I am making my screen a little wider so the code window doesn't feel quite so constrained. So I'm kind of finding a sweet spot here of like sharing the space. But you can always collapse the panel. So if you're not really using the side panel here a lot, you can collapse it this way, right? So of course I clicked the wrong button, but you get the idea. I think this will be fine for what we're doing. All right, so you got the assistant editor open. Now it says select the image view on the left and then control drag to an area within the class definition and release the mouse button. And then what we'll have here in the pop-up menu that appears is basically the name the outlet tree image view. And so just to kind of reiterate here, maybe I didn't read it quite so clearly, is that we're going to create an outlet basically for the tree, right? Because we haven't thought about this is a graphic, right? But here we're going to be changing the graphic, so that's got to respond too. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to select that image view. But before I do the control drags, and I know you guys know how to do this, but we've also kind of been in this habit of doing these what we call marks, right? And this is kind of just considered good practice. And what a lot of people do is they'll create like a mark called ID outlets. Now these are just labels, right? Like organizational tools for our own sake. If you put this in here rightly, it does create a really super light line in here, and I'm not really seeing it very clearly today, but we're going to try to put all our outlets together here in the code. All right. Some people will also do a mark down here, and they'll say VDL, like view did load, for example. And then they'll come down here and they'll do another mark, and let's call it I can type this, and this would be IB actions. Typically we kind of arrange it like this. There's no like rules about doing this. These are just notational things, but when I went through my training, my guide or whatever, instructor, facilitator, whatever, really said that this is a good idea, right? So I took that to heart, and I'm like, yeah, so what, I can roll with that. All right, let's try that. So let's do a control drag from the tree. So hold down control, make sure it's just the tree that's selected, and then control drag over here and release, right? We've done this process a number of times. We want to name this tree image view. We want to stick with UI image view, and then weak is fine. And then we'll hit connect. All right, and hopefully the circle's filled in, right? And you can tell it's working because if you hover over a little circle, the object highlights on the screen. All right. We want to repeat the same process for the two labels. And so we're going to come down here. I'm going to click on the label and control drag. I'm going to come here. And we're going to say, we'll call the first one correct word label. Making sure I'm spelling it right. And then we'll connect. And then we'll do the same thing with the bottom one. So control drag. And this one will be called score label. There's my connect. Right. You can tidy up the space in between these if you want. And my thinking on it is when you get a whole bunch of these, it's really kind of nice to tidy it up and make it really compact, because otherwise you're going to be scrolling for days looking for this stuff. All right. All right. So the next little tidbit on page 369 says it's tedious to create a separate outlet for each UI button. Instead, create one outlet that holds the collection of buttons. So this is a different approach, right? So like going in, here we are psyching ourselves up and thinking, oh man, I got to do this 26 times, on top of these three, right? And that's actually not how we're going to do it. So what we're going to do is we're going to begin by selecting the letter Q, control drag to the class definition to create an outlet. All right, so all right. Change the connection type from outlet to outlet collection, right? So there's the magic sauce right there. And I lost my okay, I lost my little place in the text here. Then set the name of the outlet collection to letter buttons. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and click connect. All right. And I want you to notice as I did that one, look at the difference here. So because it's in square brackets, that implies like a list or an array or a collection or whatever, right? So like a grouping of objects. So if it looks like that, that's great. Right now, when you hover, it's still just gonna connect the letter Q, right? And you can guess that that's probably we're gonna fix that next, right?
Mhm.
Now, so this is the cumbersome part. So I'm just kind of putting it out there in advance. Now you're going to click and drag from the circle to the next outlet, next to the outlet collection, and drag to another button. And then once you hit it, you'll know that it's valid because it turns blue. And I'm going to show you that in a second. Then release the mouse button and do this for each button in the scene. So all of them. This is the fun part, as we say. But this is a whole lot easier than doing what we just did, right? Where you have to name every letter and, obnoxious. So here we go with the, so this is a click and drag, not a control drag. So just be mindful of that. So I'm going to go to W, E, and then I want you to notice when you hover, those other letters are highlighting too, right? If you find this cumbersome, you can also drag over to the panel here, but so far it seems to be working just fine going right to the letters. So I'm just one at a time, real simply and methodically. Of course, if you miss one, pretty easy to fix, right? Because you can see from the hover what worked and what didn't. This is just a click drag. Now you can imagine, how do we figure out which letter we're on? Well, then we just look at the title on each button is what we're doing, right? And I thought I skipped one there. So we'll handle which button it is programmatically, and it's just more logical to do it that way. All right, so it looks like I have them all connected. So now I'm hovering and I see all of the letters highlighting. All right. Now, they're going on to this next instruction here at the bottom of page 370. And they say each button also needs to be tied to an action. It's tedious to create separate action for each button and instead create one action that all the buttons call when pressed. And it says, once again, begin by selecting the letter Q. So select that button. I'm going to do it there so I make sure it's highlighted. And then control that and release the mouse button. And this time we're creating an IB action. So control drag, and I'm going to drag that down here, this part of the code. If you find it easier, to do that above the view to load, you could, but this is kind of the standard spot to put it. So once again, control drag. This is an action this time. We're going to set this to be called letter button pressed. Change the type to UI button. And then I think the touch up inside is the standard thing. Arguments are for the sender. And go ahead and click connect. All right, so there's that little snippet of code. So, all right, I'm just reading the instructions. When you press connect, the method is created. Whenever a button is tapped, it should be disabled. A player can't select a letter more than once in the same round. All right, so we're gonna just add a little snippet of code here, and you can copy this from the book, but I'm gonna be typing it in here. So I'm gonna say sender dot is enabled equals false. So once it's pressed, they can't press it again. You get one go with that letter. All right, so now they ask a question. So I'm on the top of page 371. They say, why change the argument from any to UI button in the pop-up? Okay, so here's the kind of thing. Since there's 26 buttons connected to the same action, you'll need to use the sender to determine which button specifically triggered the method. If the sender has the type any, you can't access the title property. That's the why, right? So use the other approach, you can. And so we will need that. So now it says control drag the rest of the buttons to the existing action. And you'll know it's valid because a blue rectangle will appear as you hover over the mouse near the method. So we're going the other direction this time, but it is a control drag from each button. So I'm going to click on W and a control drag to this method. See how it highlights blue, right? And let go.
Yeah.
All right, so just very methodically do that process. And yes, it's cumbersome, but hey, that's how we got to do it. Now, if you're finding it a little problematic like I am, you can do this. So you can click in the panel and do it. And so if you're kind of strategic about it, and I'm going to say it real bluntly, if you're kind of smart about it, this might be the better approach. You see what I'm doing? Is I'm kind of pulling these things close to each other. The only reason you might want to still see the panel is you can see the buttons, right? So, but if you know, we can check it at the end, basically, is kind of my point. There. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just bring the panel back, and then I'm going to hover over this. I just want to see all the letters highlight, and then I'll feel better about it. You see, right? Okay. Then I'll continue on my merry way and hit the other stack views here. So that was the first stack view. Now I'm going to do all the rest of them. Very systematic, very methodical. And my gut feeling on this is after we accomplish this action, this is a lot kind of to do in one day. So I think we're going to call it after we do these steps.
Okay.
Unless there's like a logical build point that's coming up soon. Ideally, I'd get the whole app done in one day, but you know, there's a little bit of work here. Plus, we're missing somebody, so don't want to have them be too far behind. All right, so once again, I'm going to check all those. And there we go. Pretty good so far. So far, so good. And then following our logical pattern here. Now, I do have this like wonder. So here's me. I'm going to test the theory, and it might not be a smart theory. I'm just telling you in advance. I'm going to try drag all these buttons at the same time. Makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's try it.
Wow, I didn't even think
What's
of
the
that.
worst thing? What's the worst thing that can happen? The worst thing that can happen is it works.
It looks like it
It
did.
saves us a bunch of times. Did it work? No.
No. Oh.
Oh, it just grabbed the letter C, the one I dragged. All right.
Oh, wow.
All right. So now I'll have to do them manually. Okay, sorry. Shortcut people. Sometimes you actually have to do the work. C we already got. There's V. B. And then I'm finding that as I'm going, I'm getting faster at it, you know, and then I'm done. All right. Let's hover over those connections on and see if they all light up now. Whew. Okay, so we did it. That was pretty good. All right, so we are at a build point now. So we want to build and run. And as we tap a button, we'll also notice that it should get disabled at this point, right? Because they're all going off the same action. So let's see if that actually happens. So hit the run button, get the simulator up on the screen here. There it is. I'm going to go ahead and tap, and notice what happens to the button after I tap it. So you can go through, it works when all the buttons become disabled after clicking them. So if you can do what I just did, you're good.
Yep.
All right. I'm just taking a peek now, and I'm just kind of saying this out loud. Yeah, we're getting to the code part of this. So my inclination is let's take a pause for today and call it a day. And then when we come back next time, we'll do the rest of this. But this is a good head start. The interface is important, right? Getting the stuff up on the screen correctly is important. And the next step is writing the code or the logic for it. And we're most of the way there. This is a fun little app to build for sure. All right, I'm going to stop the recording. So this recording ends here.